Sorry.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast today. I'm with Dorothy Hummel, and she came across my radar, about a year or so ago now? Probably about a year or so. And she does some amazing work, which if you sit tight and listen, and this whole episode is actually gonna blow your mind. So we're just gonna get straight into it. So thanks for coming on today.
And thank you for having me. Look forward to it.
That's good. That's good. So right now you're in Copenhagen. It's been a year living in Spain. We were discussing that before, but I'm not too keen on backstories. The listeners know that. It's like, let's just get into the conversation, and usually the backstories reveal. So we'll just start with the big question in the room. What do you do?
And it is actually a big question because I'm always trying to compress it as much as I can, but it is really comprehensive when you think about how much I put together. So basically, I'm a human performance coach, but I work in the intersection of the brain, if you can call it that, which means the brain, performance, biology, behavior. I combine all these things based on neurogenetics. So that means the genetic information from the brain, but also the full physical information from the genetics as well. Sorry. Because as I also want to share later, is that the whole thing is combined. You cannot separate the brain from the body. So to understand the full personal nutrition need, which is based on the functional nutritional need, specifically personalized, based on information. It's data-based, it's science-based. So to actually differentiate it from what we know from sports psychology and mental trainers, in this case, I'm using completely data because it's faster, it's more efficient, and we don't have to have all the guesswork.
Yeah, it's so good, because when you think about a lot of performance, it's very guesswork driven, isn't it?
Yeah.
Big stumbling blocks in performance training, as it were, is that it's the constant chase for the transfer of training to understand like what works, and lots of practitioners don't even actually measure the efficacy of their interventions.
No,
They
exactly.
expect the numbers to change on a bar or a sprint time to decrease without actually understanding the global cost of that or the context of that. So when we think about not separating the brain from the body, how do you start communicating that to athletes, and when they start talking to you about, oh well, maybe we can do some work, what do you do, how can you make me better, how does that conversation look?
If I should put it in a very simple explanation, it would be the same as, because it relates a little bit to your part of the training. Let's say that you were training your athletes to run faster, which you do, and they were still just jumping on one leg. And that would get them, probably because you have an expertise, it would get them so far. But if you then all of a sudden they realize they actually had two legs to run on, would they then run faster? Most likely. And it's the same thing I always try to explain to the athletes, is that if you only focus on the physical part, it will only take you this far, which is why we look at this marginal gains that everybody's obsessed about in sport. So we look at the marginal gains because we only have marginal gains to accomplish. Since we're all looking at the same somehow, it's all based on physical. But what most people, they either neglect or they ignore or not being focused enough about is understanding that the brain is the main operator on every physical output. So, I mean, you couldn't even run fast, you couldn't even walk, talk, or have any kind of behavior if you didn't involve the brain. So if people understand that there's layers to the brain, then that means, for me at least, because I feel like that in sport, every time you mention anything about mental sport psychology, it's just like a fluffy thing. They don't really know how it works, or is it problem, is it reactive? But actually, when we think about it, and especially from my approach, is always to understand that before we even get into the understanding of the mind and the mental part of it, there's actually a whole brain. There's a neurochemistry that needs to be tapped into. There's biology, biochemistry, and then there's the genetic and the environment. So I don't even factor the psychological part in before I clean up in everything, because that is related and connected to the physical body. So that's when I try to tell the athletes is that if you want to like push through the limitation or the barrier for anybody to excel in their sport, because everybody always wants to reach the next level. But if you don't factor in the understanding of the power of the brain, you will still be fighting with that one margin that everybody else is fighting about.
Yeah, yeah. There's so much in that, and the thing that just jumped straight to my mind there is the saying or the statement that we have to stimulate the central nervous system to get progress. And like with sprinting, you have to sprint above 90% to stimulate the CNS, which is a really flawed paradigm, I believe, because of all the things that you've just spoke about. Because the brain doesn't receive maximal input very well. It doesn't respond well to maximal outputs. And when you're there, you're say you're speaking, you're having that conversation, you have to think about like our mouth can only produce 5 key sounds, to which then we're trying to verbalize all the things that we think are going on with the therapeutic side of it. That's what psychology they think. But then there's all the processes that are going on before all of that happens that create all the antecedents that create the motivations, which then create the perceived problems and the distress signals. So when so coaches may be listening to this thinking, I'm interested, but what's the process? What's the plan of attack? What are some of the big rocks that we can move?
Well, for 99%, I would always say, let's start with the data. Let's understand the individual, because it's always super, super essential to understand that we're born with a certain blueprint. And if you don't know what that is about, you're just fumbling a little bit blindly on concepts or theories, and then see if it works. Hopefully it works. And for 50% it might, but what about the rest? So to begin with, I would always say, let's do a testing. Let's see how your genetic profile looks, because even our behavior is genetically wired. Yeah. So that means if we understand that to begin with, it's easier to customize what the individual have of limitations, first of all, but also where do they have a potential that we can dig out of this. So that would be the first way. But also to understand them when we talk about all these things that most people probably have already heard about, motivation. Yeah, we need dopamine for that. But can you also have produced too much dopamine? And what effect does that have on the physical performance? It's massive, if you ask me. It's massive output this has to not know if you're an athlete. Because all the things that individuals usually struggle with, you will probably also see some people that you can accelerate them within no time. And then there will be other people, for some reason, putting the same work and effort into it, and still they're not really progressing. And that could be due to some simple basic nutrients that for some reason they're not capable of breaking these things down. And then we're back to, which I'm not going to go into the deep level of it, but that's based on genetics and biochemistry. How well do we break down things in order for us to either improve or decrease some of these different hormones we have? For instance, stress hormones, it could be one thing, but also to actually methylate all these nutrients that we need in order for us to be performing at a highest level that's possible. And until we know that, it's harder for us to actually build anything around that. So that would be my starting point, no matter who you are, to let's see the data and then build something from that. And within that would be, let's balance everything, because as soon as you have an ongoing circulation of biochemistry communicating well, being sure that you have access to the right nutrients, but also the right chemicals, then from that, we can actually, it's a little bit like increasing the brain plasticity, the brain understanding for adapting these different behaviors. And then you can add in whatever would be necessary for the individual for coping mechanisms or even strategies that they can work from. But it's almost impossible for someone to work on a cognitive program unless they have understanding of how the neurochemicals work, and it's individual. So that's why I always say to people that, yeah, we could go from a model or a theory, but it will probably only hit 50% of the people you're talking to.
Yeah, that's amazing. In some of the original training texts, you would have like non-responders, slow responders, or fast responders to a certain training stimulus. And I mean, at that time, I don't think genetic testing was too readily available to get that information. So you're advised to understand. And again, this is just testing output data. That, well, if the needle, if we're doing an intervention, the needle's not moving, then something needs to change.
Exactly.
And hand cell stress adaptation, supercompensation and the alarm. Oh, whatever, I can't remember. I've studied it for too long. But so I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head right now. Tells you the day I've had.
That feels.
But so again, I'm just thinking, like, stream of consciousness here, that we are, as practitioners, guessing about guessing. And it's obviously a multi-layered approach, and not necessarily understanding, especially as like physical performance staff who are undervalued largely in many professional fields, that there's such a low degree of accuracy of what we can actually do. And that's kind of where what you're talking about really starts to step in. I remember years ago that when, like, what's that company, DNA Fit came on the cards. Have you heard of them?
Yeah.
And
probably.
they came into the team I was working with, and the players were like, "Oh, you're free. You can have as many tests as you like." And like the little prick of blood, and the club just like blackballed it. They were like, "No chance are we giving 50 professional athletes data away for free, not knowing what it's being tested, used for, or coming back." And I think they're only testing for about 200 markers. And when we consider, I think we've spoke about it before, some of the stuff that you look at, how many markers are you screening for when you start collecting data?
Oh my goodness, it's more than 500. So obviously technology has also evolved, of course. And I also want to actually add on to that, what you just mentioned, because I have had a lot of athletes who came back and said, yeah, but I did that genetic testing. And it's not to emphasize or even, do any advertising for any specific company, because the point I want to make about it is that you can have tons of tests, but if you don't know to apply it and also combine it, which is also, I think, probably that I'm, for now at least, one of the only one that I can, for until I get surprised about somebody else doing it. But since that you can combine it, but also understand the interconnectedness, which is for me absolutely essential to understand that if you isolate genes, for instance, and then just look for the speed gene, for instance, the ACTN3, which could be relevant for you. But then again, if you also then don't have the understanding of, let's say, how do you metabolize the cortisol, and how is your methylation working? So that gene is not necessarily going to be as effective as you thought, because you haven't looked at everything else. So that would also affect the dopamine production, for instance, or lack of dopamine in the given performance. So for me, I think you can test, from here to New Year, and then you will still not necessarily understand how to get the right information out of it if you don't understand how to connect these things. And that's also why when people think about, why would you need a urine testing, for instance, to see my cells when you do mental training? And I'm always saying that if I don't have that information, I don't know how to trigger your neurochemicals in the right way, but also what is actually blocking you for having this right amount of chemicals that we want to have on a given performance, because that's usually what are creating all these mental errors that we all hear all the time in the media when seasons are going on and they come back in press conference, and then they always mention the thing about they had so many mental errors, or they didn't have momentum, or they didn't have it that specific day. But what they're actually saying, probably without knowing, is that these individuals, they didn't actually have the right amount in the right situation, those chemicals, because those chemicals is what drives you. That's what make you tick in the given moment. But if you don't have access to it because of a food intolerance or a bad methylation or whatever that might be, then obviously that will create the mental errors that could cause a complete loss for a full team. So it's about understanding that it would be brilliant to just do one test, get one result, and then just follow that. But the problem with sport today is also that we have a tendency of isolating things. So when especially for teams, for instance, you would know that. Then there's a physiotherapist who just look at this specific symptom, which is usually more the reactive. There could be some preventive, and then there's the nutritionist who look at the sports nutrition in that relation. But nobody actually, combine all these things. But when you think about what you just said, the nervous system is the biochemistry, and the biochemistry is a communication to the neurochemistry. That means the brain is operating the whole nervous system. So if we don't look at these things in combination, I still believe, probably also from my experience, I believe that instead of we always keep focusing on the marginal gains, I do believe most athletes are missing out of at least 10%, which I call a major gain, by not understanding this whole thing about the chemistry, the individuality, and then the brain power behind it.
Yeah, you put it together so eloquently.
Oh, I'm glad you say that.
So you've used the term methylate a few times. So could you kind of explain what that is?
Yeah, because basically it's a pretty hard to explain biochemical process, but to put it pretty simple, because I try to convert it so it's understandable for most people. So if you were to compare it as when we dig up oil from the soil, but you don't want to put it directly into a vehicle, so it has to be converted and transformed to something, and then it's usable. That process goes on in the brain as well. I mean, in the body as well. So that means when we eat a certain kind of food, then there would be some necessary accessible nutrients, or it could be all the stress hormones. But we want to break them down so it's not floating in the system unused or unprocessed in the way that we actually have access to the cells. So that for us to have the right access to these things. And if you're on a genetic level has a bad methylation, then obviously those stress hormones, which could be adrenaline and norepinephrine and cortisol in particular. So that means for this individual who has those high level of cortisol, which most will during a game or a match, then that means that amount of cortisol on a longer period is not capable necessarily of being decreased in the proper way as it's supposed to do afterwards. And then there's a lot of mental things going on stress-wise in between the games. So that means you will end up having a chronic, like low grade of stress affecting you. And that obviously going forward would increase the likelihood of injuries, which is then also something we would be able to see on a genetic profile. So that's part of why methylation is so important to know on an individual level for sure.
Yeah. So basically it's essentially like the combustible processes that either accept or reject these things, right? What is it? Any food that you eat is outside your body until your body chooses to use it, right?
Exactly. Good term. Yeah.
That makes perfect sense to me. So as you're talking, there's a couple of things that have really sprung to mind. Following on from that last point, like I think the performance management profession does a terrible job of managing athlete readiness. When I first started working in professional sport, it was all about subjective wellness, checking the weight every day. You may do a jump test to see blah, de, blah, de, blah. And, looking at GPS and, you can't swing too far. And, there was some breakout research that was taken from cyclists from the Tour de France. You may have heard of like the acute chronic ratios. So then that got just thrown into team sport like it was gospel. And it was kind of like, well, that makes no fucking sense, because it's illogical to apply that. Like a lot of the work that I do with my speed stuff and team sports, it's a holistically understanding like the interconnected relationship between putting one foot in front of the other and scoring points. It's not running to score, right? So,
Exactly.
So I was just thinking there when you said how managing these high stress environments. Do you think, right, that a professional athlete, like a player or anyone in any walk of life, right, can almost work too hard to try to recover and create more stress in their body?
Absolutely.
Because I was thinking like a rugby player, like in rugby, they'll be back squatting heavy weights at the end of the season to like maintain strength. They've played 30 plus games. That's not going to be the performance driver, is it really? Because it's a basic tool. So all of a sudden you've got all this constant input, and then you have to compete, you have to manage your training load. And for anyone listening, I'm using lots of hyphenated air bubbles here.
Yeah, me too.
So because it's asserting a level of control via guesswork, but then what does that do to the athlete? They just their general performance actually decline, and I guess you have to achieve higher states of arousal to beat that week on week. So the gap is getting bigger, and then I guess that's when you break. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, a lot. Sort of. So first of all, actually to that, I think the biggest mistake that's probably have been focused on for many years in sport, which is the obsession about the sports data, obviously. So just to bring that in, because what we do look at, however much good data we have on that, which is obviously important because we want to measure the actual performance. So, but I think we also hit a limit for how much more can we probably by measuring improve by performance. So what I at least look at is everything that goes on in between the performance, because I think when you think of an athlete probably being active, let's say they're on the facility for whatever, what could that be, 4 to 6 hours a day, depending on sport, of course. But what is really going on is everything in between that. So that means you still have like 12, 16 hours plus that you're not on the performing facility. So by not understanding what is going on there on a physical, but also on a mental level, and what consequences does that affect the actual performance you're getting ready for. So when you said about the readiness and the performance, because I also hear a lot of teams they have tons of things that athletes they could go to for recovery. So that means they have a cold plunge, they have a hyperbaric chamber and everything, which is also nice fancy gear. And at the end of the day, it's just, men with toys. So, but nobody actually look into when is the most efficient way to do this. What timing do you have to focus on? Do they focus on the acute recovery right after a given performance, for instance? Not in my experience, at least. And what is also going on in the preparation on the invisible hours, because so much is going on in between that actual performance where the athlete would be measured. And that's why I feel like there's a huge gap not being looked into when you think about what you could accomplish by how do we actually level up the athletes. And it's very rare that it's more on the pitch, actually.
Because
I don't know if that actually answered anything of what you said, but that was...
It does. It really does. I think there is an excessive use of cold therapy. Obviously it's very trendy right now because someone put a paddling pool in everyone's back garden that they can get in. It's a very commercial thing, but
Yeah.
I think you have to look at things that almost like stand the test of time. And for example, like saunas, like they have stood the test of time for a good reason, because heat must do something very different to the brain and the body than cold.
Yeah, absolutely.
I go in a sauna. I train in the morning, and I go in it probably 3 or 4 times a week for about half an hour. I feel really good for it. I feel
Yeah.
calm
Yeah, exactly.
and loose, and I think that I don't get that from cold. I get like the complete
It's not
opposite.
the same. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, from your experience with the athletes that you've worked with and stuff, have you modulated recovery tools
Absolutely.
based on what examples have you got?
Well, first of all, some again genetically has a different need for specific recovery. So first of
Yeah.
all, again, by knowing that, we know exactly that this individual might have a higher likelihood of injury. What would that look like? Who needs to know that information more than just the athlete? And also for them to add on something that would be some interventions that could be calming the nervous system, whether that could be sauna, it could be meditation, it could be breath work, but we have to again customize it to the individual, because like I keep emphasizing, we are individuals, we have individual needs. I cannot emphasize and stress that enough, to be honest, because again I hear that also, that now we do breath work, now we do this, and we just randomly throw around all these tools, and like something might be really good, but then again, if you have a low BDNF, you might have a really poor decision making or brain plasticity when you're under pressure. So that means that individual might need something a little slightly different right before the game and not necessarily between the matches. So it's always super important, but obviously something like cold plunges and saunas. But then again, instead of thinking that the more the merrier, then obviously it's also important to say, so if you want to have the cold in because you might have a high sensitivity to inflammation, it's good to do it, but maybe because of something else in terms of your cortisol, it's not the ideal for this individual. So I certainly do those things. And also when during the day would you normally go to do that? Maybe we should flip that around, because it might affect your bad sleep, for instance, because the sleep quality, instead of just having a certain amount of hours, again, just a random recommendation. And again, when we talk about sleep as a recovery tool, because it's most people are pretty much aware about it, but I'm also a little bit like, again, we're back to the guesswork, because unless I actually know my individual circadian rhythm, and how well do I respond, methylate, how well do I break down my stress hormones, what else do I need to factor in terms of working around my sleep as well. So for me, there's so many things that we need to put together before we just have random recipes we play around with, because then again, we're just back to the guesswork. We're just trying something out, and then unless we actually evaluate very specifically and very detailed, we never end up having the right result anyway. It's just going to be a random trying out things. And there's nothing wrong with trying things out. The question is always what I ask my athletes: how much time do you have in your professional career to just gamble around with things? Usually not a lot. And that's why I say, the more we know, the more specific and precise we can be, and the less goofing around you have. So that means you have a better increase of your performance on a precise plan, instead of just trial and error all the time.
And I know, like, it's a really good point that I know some of the athletes that you work with, there are literally millions of dollars at stake as well. There is a lot of money, life-changing money for generations.
Absolutely.
And that's such an important point. When you talked about sleep there, I used an Aura ring for a good couple of years. And I'm typically your early riser. I I think what's really fascinating is that it told me everything I knew about myself anyway. And so early riser, I'm more creative and productive in the morning. I like to train about mid-morning. I don't really do that now because I have to train before I go to work. But and then like the afternoon time, I'm very different. It's when I can start really winding down. And it was really interesting just to observe my own insight to the point of which it became so predictable, I stopped wearing it because I didn't need it. And HRV is so variable anyway. You're like, oh, how have I not got like a 90? And you won't go out and have a few drinks, and then you have you get an 11, and you're just like, well, of course it's 11. I feel like crap. Like
exactly.
And it's quite interesting. Like, you know, the difference when you've slept too much. And I literally had it yesterday. I was like, I woke up at 5 and then closed my eyes, and then it was 7:30, and I was like, oh my God, that was too much. Like, so chemically I was just out of whack. And so with sleep, because it's really affordable, how do you on the individual basis, obviously we go back to the individual basis, but do you encourage, like, because I know you do yoga, you've got like yoga nidra, so it's like non-sleep rest activity which mimics that. Are there some like strategies that you've used that you've seen just like, oh wow, that's really obvious, very quick, very easy? Are there any specific like case studies that you said that you have around sleep, for example?
Well, you mentioned yoga nidra, which is also one of my favorite for anybody. I use it every single day myself as my lunch break, sort of, because I have a tendency of having a pretty overactive brain until I tell it to be quiet. So for me, that works really well. And for anybody that I recommend it for, like taking a break, you can have 10 minutes, you can 20 minutes, you can have an hour. But the understanding is obviously you don't sleep. You just have a near sleep deep rest. So it's really efficient. But also people that has a little bit of difficulty for winding down before they sleep. So let's say they have a late practice, late game, for instance, and they're just too wired with adrenaline, which could be a big problem for a lot of athletes. Usually they have the yoga nidra as a go-to as well. But it could also be breath work, depending on how you do the breath work. Because again, I know it's also an intervention that's very used with a lot, but it's also because it's very efficient. But there's so many variants of how you do the breath work. So again, we're back to understanding. So when do I do what kind? So breath work could be used during a match. It could be done in the morning as an uplifting thing for getting more brain clarity, but also getting all your chemicals wiring before something that is important. But for those that has some need, let's say they have a difficulty sleeping, for instance, could be breath work even during sleep. So let's say, I mean, again, I bring myself up because I have, I'm always challenged a little bit with my sleep. So I'm trying everything that is possible. Again, we could also come back to, it could be some specific supplements the individual might need, which could be part of the brain to help them calm down. But if it's nothing to do with testing or supplements or anything, it could be understanding that breath work. Let's say you wake up during the night and you can't fall asleep. Then the breath work where you actually have, let's say 3-4 seconds inhale, and then you just have a longer exhale. It could be twice as much, like 4 inhale, but always the double as long out. So let's make 8 seconds exhale. So every time you exhale, you're always calming the nervous system, and you can really do it until you fall asleep. It's really efficient as well. And then you're also more capable of calming down the brain, calming down the nervous system. And by that, you should usually be able to get faster into a deep sleep again. So that's usually something that a lot of people are very happy with.
Yeah, no, I like that. That's actually something that I'm very similar to you. I have quite an overactive brain, and wake up in the middle of the night thinking about all this stuff that you probably shouldn't be thinking about, like even like what food I'm having for dinner and all that. And
exactly.
and
It's like really ridiculous stuff. It's like I don't even need to think about these things now.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
and I guess having that level of self-awareness is such a win. Like just
Mm,
generating that awareness, remember, you know, you work with some athletes, and they're like, I'm just allergic to load, and it's because like in
mm,
rugby, if you or
mm,
these contact sports, I know you've got a lot of experience with American football and stuff.
mm-hmm,
It's if you survive, then or you're not robust enough for the game, which is completely
mm,
flawed, because
mm,
how can you expect all different body types, all different shapes and sizes, contractile profiles to survive the same game
mm,
in the same way? So
mm,
it's not whether you're good enough or not. It's, as you say, it's if the prescription is right,
mm,
and how you're managed. And I think the type of, you know, a lot of the information that we have are baked into our natural tendencies.
mm,
And you know, the work that you do, which I really love, is being able to then support that and
mm,
give real scientific rationale behind it. And so this
mm,
is, you know, you're not like, think of the you know, the athlete that's had multiple hamstring injuries. It's That's not
mm,
because you're fragile. That's not, you know, that internally baked into someone. It's like, oh, I'm injury
mm,
prone, I'm going to lose a contract. No, it's not. It's because this is not working with this, and then we
mm.
can build the recipe to
Yeah.
solve that. And
Yeah.
it leads me into a really interesting point that I wanted to raise with you today. Like right now, in a lot of field sports, we are in an ACL epidemic.
Yeah.
One of the coaches that I work with, he's in Gaelic sport. He's fast tracking to rehab 100 ACLs in a 12-month period.
Oh God.
Yeah, and
God.
and we're in a hamstring epidemic as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not because we're not training. Like, it's not. I
No.
don't think it's because athletes aren't doing enough gym work.
Mm-hmm.
I would really like to hear your thoughts around these bad injuries and sprint related injuries, and
Mm.
what that, you know, what your thoughts are from your
Well,
professional opinion.
it's very interesting that you actually brought that up because I'm sorry, I'm just trying to have my phone straight because it needs to charge.
It's
So
all right.
so it's very interesting. Obviously, I need to emphasize also so people don't mess me up with. I have no expertise as a trainer or as a physiologist, just to make that clear. So I'm not trying to
Neither
pretend
do
I'm an
I.
expert.
I've been
No,
lying for
that's good.
years.
So
It's
I'm just
okay.
not trying to pretend I'm an expert on fields I'm not. However,
Yeah.
I do have a lot of athletes when they come see me and they're like, I just don't get it. I get injured all the time. It's been 18 months. I still have this ACL or whatever, or it could be like you know, whatever. But anything that's related to somehow it seems like there's a chronic inflammation. That's so weird. I'm doing the quote
Yeah.
unquote as well, just
Yeah.
if people don't
Yeah.
know. And and not because I have like a magic drug or anything. It's more that okay, but let's look at your biochemistry because I know medical doctors, physiotherapists, or whoever they are in related to on the staff. Nobody is looking at why is this. I'm always curious about. Let's ask another question, not the what, but the why.
Yeah.
Why is it that this individual keeps having these injuries? That I mean, like you
Mm,
said, the training probably with a good, hopefully, support on that. They get the treatments and they get all these great expertise. And why on earth are they so injured all the time?
mm,
And for most of the people, in at least my expertise and who I have helped, as soon as we fix that biochemistry, which is like there's an ongoing inflammation all the time. It's like there's a fire, you just keep feeding it all the time. And as soon as you
mm,
remove that, then obviously the muscles are better to adapt and to recover and to work normally.
mm,
So for me, it's not really rocket science. It's just about understanding that you need to understand what this individual is made of. And if there's something about that chronic, or it sounds chronic because it's probably been there for a long time, but why is it you keep having it? You're not supposed to be chronic. And as soon as we understand that, we customize the lifestyle, the nutrition, the supplements, the mental part that also affects the inflammation. And as soon as we put that right plan in place, it's very, very often that, I mean, it's probably all the time, I see all of a sudden they don't have that prone to injury anymore. They might have it, but that means you might need to train with the physio or the personal trainer. Knowing this, I have a tendency of maybe having a weak tendons in my joint, in my elbow, for instance. Okay, that's your weak point. How would you normally train that as a proactive preparedness? And that's, again, instead of being reactive about when things show up, what do you need to focus on as the individual you are? And that's how I would look at it. For me, it's not really that complicated. I'm afraid to say. It's just about understanding what you're made of. And as soon as you know what you're made of, you can have that proactive plan instead of waiting for things to occur.
I think you're spot on there, and there's so many the things that, like the deep qualitative measures that are required can't be done in tell me out of 5 how well you slept, how sore you are, what's your mood. And I mean, I did that every day, and the players wouldn't. They'll just tell you the numbers that made sense on the day. You know, it's and it was kind of like I got to the point where I was like filling it in for them, and just because it didn't matter. And it's very Western culture is really and sport. They're one in the same, where Western medicine is very symptom driven, and it has to be, active all the time. And sport culture is like that. There's almost like a preparation out of fear all the time. It's proactive in the wrong ways. And I strongly believe that lots of professional athletes train too much, and lots of amateur athletes train too much because they don't balance the cycles of rest and recovery. But they will actively try to recover to then beat the wave of fatigue, rather than just saying, well, instead of 8 practices in 9 days, well, let's do 8 practices in 16 days and get a better result. But that's the fear-based approach. And I've got one question that's just popped into my head just before we wrap up. Now, obviously, there's as science is progressing, and I'm really interested in your thoughts and like how like pharmaceuticals are progressing and becoming more widely accepted. What's your opinion on the use of peptides and synthetics in the performance space from a brain chemistry point of view, the work that you do? Because I know the writing's on the wall, because you're now seeing peptides going in face creams and stuff like that. So, and you can buy peptides from Amazon. It's a strange. Well, the writing's on the wall for it to be very mainstream, probably a lot quicker than we understand. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not yet an expert on peptides. It's actually really funny you mentioned this, because I have a meeting with a peptide company I might be doing something with which I have next week. So I'm not yet an expert enough to actually to give you the right comment on that. However, obviously, it's part of the cell. So we do know, at least as a nutritionist perspective, I do know something about peptide. And there's no doubt that peptides could do a lot for us. I do also know in some sports it's not allowed. I just don't know how you can actually measure it. So I think there's a lot of questions still to be asked about it. I mean, I do favor them for sure, and I would probably also start using them or recommend them myself. But again, like anything else, I don't recommend anything unless I'm completely skilled at it and have enough knowledge, which I'm hopefully going to get. But I do believe that's going to be something that we will probably look much more into when we think about our everything, which I also hope for, because that's my whole message about this, is that we have to be better at preparing ourselves. We have to be better at factoring in the whole human being. And that
Yeah.
whole human being needs recovery, like you said, mentally, but also physically. And could we do something else than just be lying on the sofa? Is there something we need to be feeding the cells with, the brain with, everything? So again, when we think of peptides, or at least when I think of peptides, it's just probably more precise nutrients, if we can call it a little bit like that, categorize it a little bit. They're more precise, so you tell them where to go, if it's skin or if it's ligament or something. But I do think that's going to be something hopefully being used much more.
Amazing. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So Dorothy,
Yeah.
for people who want to find, we've got part 2, part 3. There's a few more of these coming. So this is an amazing conversation. So thank you. But for
Absolutely.
people who want to sort of seek you out, see what you're doing, where's the best place to do that?
Well, I have my daughter Hummel, my website, and actually, which I would imagine you'd be more interested in sport, on that specific sports section on my website. You go to ubique-1.dk. That's everything about sport. And then ideally, of course, reach out, send me an email on daughterhummel@me.com. So I should be easy to find.
Yeah,
And I would look forward to it.
Yeah, I'll put that in the links. Do you have a newsletter? Do you do an email newsletter? Do you do like a weekly newsletter?
Pinching my my conscience. I don't really have I'm actually building right now on a lot of things, to be honest. I might as well just be honest about this. My marketing has really been flawed. So I'm working on building my podcast. I'm building on doing some videos as well to inform people more about this approach, because I really feel like that's a huge gap that sport really needs to understand much more about. So I'm in the process. Let's just put it that way.
Well, you should do a newsletter. I'd subscribe. I'd like weekly tips from Dorothy on how to soothe my cells. There you go.
Yeah, okay. So that was a good reminder to me to make sure to build that again. I will,
That's
Sam,
brilliant.
for sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.